Welcome to this week's Smarketing Show. We're super excited to have Marianne Massad. Marianne is an author and the founder and CEO of the Knowsys Group, an IT management consulting and managed services firm since 1995. Marianne, we're so excited to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate that. It's nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about leadership. So, we sort of titled today, Bestselling author Marianne Massad speaks about leading as a woman in tech. So Let's talk about that. Talk about Knowsys Group, talk about how you got started, and let's dive in.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting story, Melissa, because I worked with some of the biggest firms in the world for the first 10 years of my career, and I achieved some crazy things, such as winning like a $20 million contract within 6 months of starting with a company called CGI Group. And, winning a $20 million contract when you've just been with a company for 6 months, pretty unique, pretty unusual. And I worked with a bunch of partners like IBM, and I worked for Ernst & Young, and I worked with a big outsourcer called Keen in the States. So I worked with a lot of different companies and always did amazing things. And you know what? By and large, I would say tech is an extremely, and has been historically, an extremely supportive environment for women. However, even achieving enormous financial goals like bringing in huge amounts of revenue and very profitable contracts sometimes wasn't enough in technology and in big business, because there was this culture of, still the old boys network. And I said to my boss, I said, it's time to make me a VP. And you know what he said to me? We don't think you're ready yet. This is after 10 years of experience and achieving like the impossible, right?
Right.
So at that moment, my company was born. And I'm sure for a lot of women in large corporations where they feel they've hit that glass ceiling, they end up starting their own businesses. So, and that's what happened. And the irony of all that is a couple of years later, that same executive VP who told me I wasn't ready yet came knocking on my door looking for a job. and I hired him. And I hired him because he was very good at what he did. Fantastic. And he enriched our business in a lot of ways. But that's the importance also of building good and strong relationships over decades, because you just never know. Your employer may be
absolutely.
Your client may be your employee. You may be, an employee of your client at some point instead of just, a vendor. You have to keep those connections tight.
Absolutely. That old never burn a bridge, right?
Absolutely.
Like full circle moment, you hired him. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Great story. Talk to me a little bit about your book. So your book title, Move from Employee to CEO of Your Own Destiny.
I thought to myself, you know what? I've done a lot. Why don't I write down what I've done and share it with people so that those people who were in my boat, where they've had very successful careers, but they feel like they've hit that glass ceiling, or they feel like they're not getting that control over their personal life and their work life. Let me sort of share with them what I did, how I did it, so that people who want to do that can find their way. And then I also wanted to walk them through the different stages of running a business, because a business never stays the same. And, you may start a business and it may grow dramatically, and there may come a time where you actually have to evaluate selling that business. Simply for many different reasons. Could be for personal reasons, but could also be because as a CEO, maybe you don't have the capacity or capability to grow it beyond where it's at. And if you want it to continue to grow and flourish, you have to put your ego aside and be willing to step away from it. Obviously, sell the company and maybe have somebody else step in as CEO. So there's many factors. So I wanted to be basically help people in that boat, and especially I targeted the book a lot to women. Because we have our own unique challenges, especially at the time. I mean, my kids were younger, and you know, raising children and being an executive is it's very challenging.
Absolutely.
And even today, with all of the stuff about diversity and whatever, relationships are still pretty conventional. Women tend to do more than the balance, in terms of more than the 50%.
Absolutely.
By and large. So I wanted to help women who were thinking about starting a business, to give them a head start. That was the whole idea.
Awesome. Fantastic. You talked a bit there about businesses are always changing, right? They are. And especially now, I mean, we've just come through a couple of years of craziness.
Oh yeah.
Talk to me about managing successfully your business over the last 27 years. Almost 3 decades worth of economic, ups and downs and all over the place, and you've had to pivot. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, because I mean, I think it's something like 1% of all women-owned businesses and end up successful, like not going bankrupt. And you got to understand that in our market, we compete with the biggest companies in the world. Like, I'm competing against the IBMs, the Deloittes, the Accentures, the Ernst and Youngs. Those are my competitors. And I mean, I'm not a multi-billion-dollar company. I don't have the resources and the marketing that they do. But what I do have that they don't have is I have the ability to change very fast, like a chameleon if necessary. And so I think the secret to the longevity and the success has been listening and changing. So we started during Y2K. It was going like gangbusters, like we couldn't keep up with the demand, which was great. But then after Y2K, we had the whole, internet bubble, which I don't know if you remember, in like 2000, 2001, that sort of bubble burst, and there was some economic fallout. And of course, September 11th happened in 2001 as well. And we had to transform our business at that point, because we were focused predominantly on managing large programs and projects for Y2K. And, it wasn't necessarily relevant anymore to the marketplace. And given all of the chaos around the internet and web-based technologies, we thought, okay, let's focus in on helping technology-based organizations to run like a business. So what are the best practices, the business processes, the cultural requirements, the organizational requirements from a governance perspective to create that success? So we built a whole practice around that to augment what we already had, and that really took off. And then we began offering training and education. We also built relationships with software companies, where we would sell a software that would help to automate something that we had improved. So, for example, if we helped to improve, incident problem change, release management in a technology-based business, we would sell them a solution that would not just it would automate the improvements that we had made. So that was another element. But then around 2010 or so, we noticed some huge changes in the Canadian marketplace. And of course, they're relevant in the US as well. And that was really the euphoria of our clients to outsource to offshore companies. In the end, what happened was we decided, hey, we can't do business anymore on a per diem basis or hourly basis, just based on the greatest expertise available to help in a tech area. No, we have to start developing solutions. And we have to start developing solutions that are geared to return on an investment, cost savings, cost avoidance. So we began packaging up our services in solutions and offering them on a fixed price basis. So clients no longer talk to us about hourly rates, they talk to us about outcomes.
Perfect.
And then we could manage our own resources and how we did the work. It was up to us, because the client just cared about what the result was.
Right.
And then we launched a managed services business around software asset management. And it is incredibly successful because, my God, we save companies tens of millions of dollars on the low end. And in some cases, with one particular client, we helped to identify about a $500 million risk for them and help them to avoid paying that $500 million risk. We have another client where we've been doing some managed services for them for the last 6 years. We've achieved over $82 million in cost savings, cost avoidance, and ROI. $82 million. How many IT companies can say that?
Yeah, that's incredible.
And we keep expanding our services, in the area of data management now, data mesh, in the area of application portfolio management, the whole idea of, a big company having hundreds, if not thousands of applications. How do you automate the whole process of rationalizing those applications? Because you don't need sometimes thousands of applications. And sometimes in those thousands of applications, you need to understand how and how they're set up so that maybe you can replicate some of those applications for new requirements, as opposed to developing net new. So again, focusing on saving, doing things in a more intelligent way. Yeah. Exactly. So that's what we did. We kept morphing. And I'm sure we're gonna morph again because we're doing a lot of work in the States, and that market is a very innovative market, and it demands a lot of innovation and a lot of dynamism, and more so even than the Canadian market. The Canadian market is very conservative, very kind of steady as she goes, but the US market is kind of
always changing.
It's the maverick. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, congratulations on what you've been doing. That's fantastic. And you talked about being a chameleon, right? Changing on the fly. You have to listen, you have to change. And so we were talking before we even started this podcast today about drawing on different things, right? Not always, you want to stay focused on your lane, but there's other things you can do. And I think that kind of leads us into my next question for you. How do you define leadership? And then what do you do to change, to listen, and pivot accordingly?
So, okay, how I define leadership. And, there's so much stuff out here. So how do you say something new that's not going to be boring to listeners or your audience? But my focus is to be extremely practical. So a leader for me is somebody who is willing to make the extremely difficult decisions and the unpopular decisions for the greater good of the company. Always looking for the best interests of the company and its survival long term. Sometimes those decisions are not fun and they are not comfortable for the people who work in the company. So that's one thing. The second element of leadership for me is leading by example. You can't tell your employees they have to do certain things, but you're not willing to do them as a CEO.
Absolutely.
You have to be willing to get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves. You have to show a lot of humility as a leader, a lot. I think the more humble you are, the greater the leader you are. So getting caught up in that whole ego trap and, thinking, I'm just going to delegate this. I'm just going to, yeah, you have to delegate 100%, but you also have to have your people see that you're delegating, but you know what? You are doing similar things, maybe on a bigger scale. The other element is, in order to be a really strong leader, you have to be able to move the ball forward in the football game. I mean, if you're doing all those things that I just mentioned, you're inspiring and you're leading by example, you're making the difficult decisions, but you have no results, I don't think you're a particularly effective leader. You have to have the results. You got to have the bottom line results, the customer satisfaction. You have to have the responsiveness to dealing with challenges, and then again, showing a positive turnaround. If you don't have all those things, to me, you're not an effective leader.
I agree. So who do you look to for inspiration and mentorship and as a leader? Like, you're a leader yourself. You know, we talked about having those moments, right? You need to be kind of pulled up from your bootstraps. What gets you there? What brings you up?
Well, I've always been a really active reader and researcher. So I tend to read like a lot of different books from many, many, many different disciplines. Whether they be business books, like Good to Great is considered like a Bible in business strategy. Jim Collins, and people like Jack Welch, who I think is born under the same astrological sign as myself, Scorpio. I found him very fascinating, and I would read not everything that he wrote, but I read a lot of stuff that he wrote, and he really did have a huge influence on me. Donald Trump, I mean, before he was president, I read a lot of stuff that he had published because he has a very unique capability around, success. Whether you agree with his politics is a completely different thing, but from a business standpoint, he's done some amazing things.
And like you said earlier, right? You're not always going to be popular.
Yeah.
But it might be the right decision.
And so I just draw from many, many different disciplines, and I see if I can take something that I can apply in a different way. And the other thing is Women Presidents Organization, which I belonged to for a good portion of my career. I wish I had belonged to them earlier in my career, especially when I started my business, because at that time I needed the most support. And Women Presidents Organization is made up of women CEOs, majority-owned women businesses who are essentially like a board for each other. They have like chapters, and you go to these meetings and you share your business issues, your business problems, and there's a methodology for solving those problems, bringing a lot of different minds and opinions. And if I had that support earlier in my business, there was a particular point in time in the life cycle of my business where I probably should have sold my business, and I didn't, because I didn't have the experience and knowledge to understand that as good as I was doing, I thought it wasn't good enough. I thought it wasn't good enough. But from a marketplace and from a potential purchaser's perspective, I probably would have maximized my price at that point in time. So that's another area. So you use different tacts that speak to you. Mm-hmm. And then I want to do a shout out to my husband, Jonathan Murphy. He's run some large businesses, 20, 30, 40, $80 million businesses. And I just find talking to him when I have a problem or issue, he typically confirms my mindset, but sometimes he also pushes me in terms of those difficult decisions, which are not popular, those difficult conversations, which are really not comfortable. They're very uncomfortable. And yeah, he inspires me a lot, and he pushes me.
Fantastic.
Lots of different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we were saying earlier, right? That's so important, because I think sometimes if we're just reading or we're just listening to the things that are in our space, we're not opening our mind to what's really out there. And like you say, you can take some of them and use them. And if they don't work for you, just let them fall away.
Yeah.
But you have to expand, right?
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up today, what are 3 things you could leave our listeners with in terms of something that they could do to be successful right away within their organization? Or just even as a leader in general, not even necessarily within their organization, just as a leader.
The first thing is you have to have very, 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 very clearly defined goals. Mm. I was looking at a performance measurement framework for one of my clients, and I was surprised by how generic and esoteric the goals were. They were not specific at all. Mm-hmm. So if you have fuzzy goals, you're going to have fuzzy results. Mm. So make your goals very precise. And focus and meditate on those goals, whatever that means. If it means, putting a photograph in your journal or your meeting minutes notebook, or putting it on your screensaver, just focus on those goals, almost become obsessive about them. Because when you're obsessive about your goals, again, you start drawing information from different sources, to help you to achieve them.
Mhm.
The second thing is realize that no matter how good things are, they're not going to stay that way forever. Nothing stays the same. So on the other side, when things are really going bad, and, you know, especially in a business and you feel like, oh, I don't even know I'm going to survive the next month, just realize that as bad as it's gotten, it actually will get better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both sides. So never get too cocky. Never believe like, oh, you know, the revenue's rolling in. I can just spend. You know, I can start hiring more people here, but because I'm just assuming that I'm going to keep getting that revenue in. No, you have to always plan for the worst. Always plan for the worst, and then usually reality is much better than the worst. But if you plan for it, and you have a contingency plan, you have a continuity plan, and you have a mindset that doesn't, okay, you get excited when you have achievements. You have to celebrate them. You have to reward your people, all of that good stuff. But you got to realize that nothing stays the same. And you have to have that spirit of change and transformation within yourself. Because if you don't, life is going to hit you pretty hard, and you're not going to, at some point, be able to get up. And that's very important for your business, whether it's an entrepreneurial business, a small, medium-sized owned business, or even a large corporation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. It's been so great having you on here, Marianne. I really appreciate it. And so if I'm listening and I don't know where to find you, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me a number of places. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me also on YouTube. At the Massad Method, which is my YouTube channel, all about entrepreneurship and leadership. You can find me on Amazon with my book, Move from Employee to CEO of Your Own Destiny. And you can also find me on our website, which is www.knowsysinc.com. So those are a bunch of places where you can find me. And if you need advice or help, especially from a technology standpoint, and especially if you're looking to save money, cut costs, create efficiencies. We work with some of the biggest companies in the world and all over the world, and we're all about results, fast, not talk.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again. It was so great to have you. And thanks again. And we'll see everyone next week on the Smarketing Show.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Smarketing Show. If you enjoyed today's show, please like, share, and subscribe to get the latest B2B insights to help you market and sell to win.